with a view from sitting on the fence. This is Backyard's Non-Tech channel. Hey, Monday morning here. We are sitting on the fence here at Backyard's Non-Tech channel, and I'm not a happy camper this morning on two levels. In fact, actually, to be brutally honest, I'm fucking pissed off. Not just with people in Melbourne, but with the leaders of various states and territories around the country who clearly cannot distinguish the difference between fucking metropolitan Melbourne and regional Victoria. Melbourne's in trouble. And as a Melburnian myself, I am absolutely pissed off with certain parts of the community up there who've jeopardised the entire economic recovery of the state and now the bloody country. There are 6 council areas of Melbourne that are in real trouble, encompassing a number of suburbs. And yet, some interstate premiers can't tell the fucking difference between metropolitan Melbourne and regional bloody Victoria. And unfortunately, neither can dictator Dan Andrews. Victoria is back on lockdown, and it could go down harder right across the state, which essentially plays into Daniel Andrews' game plan of giving everything to China, including Victorians. But what's really pissed me off is a number of interstate leaders labelling the entire fucking Victoria as a coronavirus hotspot and a danger zone. Where I live, we've had no Covid19 cases for 3 fucking weeks. And I live in a major Victorian regional, not Greater Melbourne, regional town. And yet, I'm painted with the same brush as the rest of Melbourne. Same as other parts of the fucking state. I can tell you what, at the end of all this, I'd be advising no Victorian to go interstate. Maybe New South Wales, but that'd be about it. Because every other state and territory leader has labelled Victoria, and that is a label that will now stick. They don't know the damage they're doing. The fuckwit families in Melbourne who have not followed the rules have brought Victoria back 2 months. Family transmission. The areas that are hotspots are migrant areas of Melbourne. And yet you've got dipshit WA, who's got no idea the difference between Melbourne and regional Victoria. Numbnut up there in Queensland, who's labelled the entire state. Dickhead South Australia, who clearly also can't tell the difference. And dictator Dan, who's just brushed the entire state with restrictions again. I'm a proud Victorian, but I can tell you one thing. Fuck you, Melbourne bastards. And I certainly won't ever go interstate again. I'll stay here. I won't spend my money interstate because I'm not going to be labelled, especially from where I live, I don't want to be labelled as the coronavirus carrier. Where we live, everyone has followed the rules to the letter of the law. 21 days straight, no cases. Right? No cases. Other parts of fucking Victoria haven't had anything this entire pandemic. And yet, the rest of fucking Australia can't tell the goddamn difference. Some of Victoria's biggest regional towns have been clear for nearly 28 days in some cases. And yet, we're plastered by interstate leaders the same as Melbourne. So clearly, the interstate leaders have got no idea the difference between Melbourne metropolitan and regional fucking Victoria. I live in Victoria's second biggest fucking city. And we've been clear for nearly 21 goddamn days. Actually, it's 21 days today. It's 21 fucking days today. And yet WA, South Australia, Northern Territory, Queensland and Tasmania have labelled the whole state. Get a map out, you idiots, and look at the difference. I won't be leaving Victoria. At the end of this, I'm not going interstate. Because mud like that sticks. I'd say to every Victorian, don't leave the state. It's too risky. Number one, if you do, you'll be bullied out of wherever you go. Number two, avoid Queensland. At the end of this, don't go north. You won't be welcome. Queensland will have to rely on New South Wales and the Northern Territory for tourism, because I can tell you now, I'm not going up there. Even at the end of all this, this is the... What's her name in Queensland? Palaszczuk? Has thrown so much mud at Victoria. You really want Victorians to go up and spend money at the end of all this? You can get knotted. Mud like that just doesn't wash off. The problem in Melbourne is the migrant areas of the city. And if you don't understand it, then why fucking nail the whole state? And as for dictator Dan Andrews, he's done the same thing. Label the whole fucking state. He ought to know that regional Victoria is better off than the rest of fucking Melbourne. Geelong's hurting. The Mallee and Wimmera areas of Victoria are hurting. East Gippsland is on the brink of collapse financially. And you have these migrant areas of fucking Melbourne that haven't done what they were supposed to fucking do. Every other goddamn Victorian has put up with living in a communist dictatorship, right? And now, these 6 hotspot council areas, apologies for my phone, but this is a raw channel. These fucking 6 areas of Melbourne, these 6 council areas, right? And that's enough for the entire fucking country to label the state. I'll say one thing. I won't go interstate anywhere. I don't want mud getting stuck to me by other leaders of states when I have got nothing to do with fucking Melbourne. And you interstate leaders clearly can't tell the goddamn difference between metropolitan Melbourne and regional Victoria. Christ, even the bloody surf coast has had nothing for ages. So, I mean, not that anyone's really going to care if I don't go interstate, but I'd be suggesting to other Victorians not to go interstate at the end of this, because you're not going to be welcome. Queenslanders are going to be very wary. Even if we get a freaking vaccine and treatment for this fucking thing, you're not going to be welcome in Queensland. You certainly won't be welcome in Western Australia or South Australia. Nowhere is going to welcome Victorians. Because the leaders and their propaganda machine have slung mud right across the state, especially Mark McGowan from WA. Another Chinese Communist Party sympathiser. I'm sorry, you know, this is ridiculous. Melbourne is in trouble. Melbourne's in real trouble. Right? 6 council areas are no-go zones because of high rates of family transmission. Not random community transmission, rampant family transmission. We've got multiple fucking clusters, and yet you have interstate premiers labelling the entire fucking state. I'm not worth going interstate for me now. Mainly because I don't think I'll be welcome. 12 months down the track, no way. Because mud like that sticks. So, I don't know how Queensland and Western Australia are going to make, entice Victorians to go north if you're going to label the whole state. And you've got two Communist Party synthesisers, premiers of WA and Victoria. Yes, I agree they need to keep their states safe. That's fine. But you've just thrown mud at Victoria. And that's mud that sticks. So you've done your damage as far as I'm concerned. Hume, Brimbank, Darebin, Casey, and another suburb, another council area in Melbourne. And there are multiple suburbs in those council areas are in real trouble. In fact, actually, do you know what I'll do? Let me bring up the areas of Melbourne that are in trouble. Right, here they are. Hume, Brimbank, Moreland, Darebin, Cardinia and Casey. Massive jump in family transmission. And yet the interstate fucking premiers can't... I'm down here. I'm down in here. That's not Metro Melbourne, and it's not Greater fucking Melbourne either, you numbnuts. Fuck me. Migrant area. Migrant area. Migrant areas. Okay? Huge family transmissions in these areas. 25 and 21 cases respectively over the weekend. Yes, the country needs to panic because Melbourne, not Victoria, Melbourne is on the verge of a massive second wave. It's right there on your fucking screen. And yet you interstate fucking leaders can't tell the difference between Greater fucking Melbourne and Regional Victoria. So you just label the whole fucking state. Okay, let me explain for the interstate premiers who probably won't watch this video. That doesn't surprise me. This coronavirus carrying resident of Victoria, which is absolutely bullshit, because right down through here and around here, 21 days straight, no cases. Okay? Other parts of the state haven't seen the virus, and yet are labelled the same as Melbourne. Hume, Brimbank and Moreland are fairly migrant areas. You have a lot of different immigrants coming into those areas. Same can be said for Darebin Council. These council areas have got a number of really big suburbs in them and a lot of migrant populations, especially Brimbank, Hume and Moreland. Darebin is a smaller area, but still numbers. Look at these numbers: 10, 17, 6, 6, 6, 7 in Casey. Casey again, migrant area. Same with Cardinia. That's out of Melbourne. This is Melbourne's inner north and outer northern suburbs. And you can see the line of Greater Melbourne. All the way out to freaking Pakenham, for crying out loud. I don't live in Greater Melbourne. So why label the whole fucking state? Melbourne's in trouble. It wouldn't take much for it to get from Darebin to my old side of Melbourne, the eastern suburbs. That encompasses Boroondara, City of Whitehorse, City of Maroondah, Yarra Valley Council. Once you go through there, then you're in Cardinia and Casey. You've got the Mornington Peninsula, which has been a mess anyway. So how come I know more about this than the interstate people do? Simple. I can distinguish the difference. Now, if the interstate leaders and residents of the population don't want regional Victorians who have nothing to do with Melbourne go interstate, then that's fine by me. I won't. I won't now, and I won't in the future. You'd have to give me a damn good reason to drive to New South Wales, South Australia, Queensland, right, to get me up there. Hang on a minute, guys. Back in a tick. Sorry about that. You know, I cannot believe that they're saying Victoria. It's nothing to do with Victoria. For fuck's sake, many Victorians, and I mean many, have followed to the letter of the law the dictatorial restrictions put in by Dictator Dan. Melbourne hasn't. All around here, all up through the state, have. And yet, the interstates can't tell the difference. When you sling mud like that, it tends to stick, and it sticks for a long time. So here's a good idea. At the end of all this, people north and west of Victoria don't come to us, and Victorians go overseas, because you're not going to be welcome anywhere else in the country. Be it towards the end of this year, be it next year, be it the year after. You're not going to be welcome, because interstate leaders have labelled the state. Is this a second wave? Yes, the numbers are high enough. The numbers of look at Human Brimbank. There's 27 cases just there. The majority of them family. Moreland, 6. So in Melbourne's northern suburbs, you've got what? 27 and 6 is 33 cases. At Darebin, 39 cases. Near enough, damn it, to 40. Possibly more by 9 o'clock today. Okay? Cardinia and Casey. So that's 13 cases, yes? You could call that a second wave. But it's not a second wave for the state. It's a second wave for Melbourne. So here's an idea for you, the rest of Australia. Don't come to us. From now on, just don't come to Victoria, because you'll get Covid-19, even in 12 months' time. Oh, and Victoria, don't go interstate, because you won't be welcome. Because mud like that, from Anastasia Palaszczuk, Gladys Berejiklian, the South Australian Premier, who I can't remember his name, Mark McGowan over in WA, the leader of Tasmania and the leader of the Northern Territory, won't welcome us into their states. So I'd go overseas. Once we can travel, I'd just go overseas. Because when you label the whole of Victoria the same as Melbourne, that mud sticks. Melbourne. I was born and bred there. I still call myself a Melburnian. You fucked the state. You haven't just fucked it for yourselves. You fucked the whole state. Regional Victoria has done its level goddamn best to follow the communist dictatorship rules that were forced upon us. And yet you fuckers in those areas have bent and busted the rules to the point now where, yes, that is a second wave. There'll be at least another 20 cases this morning in those areas. All right? So you fucked it for the state. The state's now fucked themselves, and we are labelled, and we will forever be labelled. Even though New South Wales had more cases and a far bigger outbreak due to the Ruby Princess, we've been targeted. I'm fucking furious. This keeps going, we'll end up like fucking New York City. And yes, we are going to stifle the economic recovery of the country. Plays beautifully into Daniel Andrews' plan, and by proxy into China. Give me a fucking break. Seriously. You interstate leaders can't tell the fucking difference, can you? You wouldn't know a bloody regional Victorian if it came across your fucking border. And you fuckers there in those bloody 6 council areas have just screwed the goddamn state. There'll be at least 20 to 22 new cases by 9 o'clock this morning. The numbers are due out. Just remember one thing. When you throw mud like that, and it doesn't matter where you live in the world, when you target a specific area, especially now, that sticks for good. And I will tell you right off the meat of the bat, at the end of all this, not a single fucking Victorian will be welcomed anywhere in Australia. Even though we will welcome other states into Victoria, they probably won't come into Victoria anymore. We're going to become an isolated state. So you fucking idiots there in those 6 council areas have just ruined it for the entire fucking country. You've ruined Victoria, and you've just played straight into Daniel Andrews' plan to alienate Victoria from the rest of the fucking country and proxy it into China. See this line here? This is metropolitan Melbourne. I'm not in Metro Melbourne. I'm in regional Victoria. Completely bullshit as far as I'm concerned. What? Jesus Christ. That's near enough, damn it, to a second wave. And it's all migrant areas of the city. To give you guys an idea, in here, Bayside Council is in trouble as well. I know that for a fact. The CBD, right in here, has got a couple of active cases. It's less than 5, which is why it's not showing up. City of Port Phillip, which is around here, has got 1 active case, which, as you can see, they're not showing. The Mornington Peninsula still has active cases, which they're not showing because it's less than 5. But Casey, Cardinia, Darebin, Moreland, Hume and Brimbank. I mean, let's add that up. What do you got there? You've got 27, 33, 39, 45, 52. 52 cases in 3 days. 52 cases. And all family transmission of some description and school transmission. Interstate, don't ever come to Victoria. We'll welcome you with open arms, but at the end of all this, you will still get Covid-19 and die. And interstate leaders, you won't see Victorians. And I doubt you'll be able to convince them to come interstate because you've thrown mud at us, and it's mud that sticks. So you've just left it open for Victoria to leave the country. Because I can tell you now, no interstate person, no citizen of New South Wales, Queensland, Northern Territory, South Australia, WA will ever welcome a Victorian anywhere. Even though we've got less cases than New South Wales, we won't be welcome anywhere else in the country because the leaders of those states have flung mud that sticks. So Victorians, I'd be advising you guys to go overseas at the end of all this because you won't be welcome interstate. And I doubt anyone from interstate will come to Victoria because the way the premiers are talking, you will get COVID-19. You will get coronavirus. Doesn't matter where in the state you go, you will get it. Even though regional Victoria is in the clear, you will get it when you go to Victoria. Fuck ya. Seriously. I am absolutely furious. And I'm not just furious because of what the interstate people have done. I'm furious because of those dipshits in Melbourne that have essentially initiated a second wave. Now, Daniel Andrews and the Chief Health Officer were hoping the second wave would actually come from the BLM protests and the climate change dumbasses. Extinction Rebellion hasn't happened. The second wave has come from families in migrant areas of Melbourne who've just fucked the whole state. And now it's all further played into the plans for the Victorian Labor Party to annex Victoria from Australia and give it to China. The only problem is most Victorians can't see that as being an issue. Well, I fucking can, because it means we don't become a democratic free society. I mean, they've buggered the whole state. Andrews has locked the whole state back. And yet regional Victoria, which accounts for the rest of the Victorian population, has done everything to the letter of the fucking law, for Christ's sake. Do you think I feel great about being locked up again? Now, my interstate viewers, you guys are free to laugh at Victoria. I give you a free kick. But your leaders can't tell the fucking difference. Victoria is not the problem. It's Melbourne. And I think some interstate leaders need to distinguish between Melbourne and Victoria. I certainly won't go interstate. I wouldn't be welcome. At the end of all this, no Victorian anywhere in the goddamn country will always be looked at as being suspicious. Every single interstate person will put 6 foot between us and them on the fear we've got Covid-19. Doesn't matter where in the state we come from. I haven't been home this year. Not once have I been home this year. And yet, if I was to go to South Australia, I would be called, first off, I'd be called a Melburnian because I'm coming from Melbourne. No, I'm not. I'm coming from Geelong, which is not fucking Melbourne, you dipshit interstate leaders. Greater Melbourne finishes at Little River, winds all the way around to Rosebud, as far out as Pakenham, and as far north as probably Calcallo, maybe even Broadford or Wallen. As far east as possibly Emerald or Warburton. So how come I can tell the difference between Greater Metropolitan Melbourne and you state leaders can't tell the difference? This will bugger the country's economic recovery. Yes, this is a second wave. And yes, these idiots in Melbourne have ruined everything. And yet Daniel Andrews has labelled the whole fucking state again. Guarantee you, there will be at least 20 to 25 new cases this morning at 9 a.m. Anyway, you watch. And I can tell you now, I won't go interstate. Because I won't be welcome. No Victorian will be welcome anywhere in the country after this. And I doubt, we would welcome other people coming into the state of end of all this bullshit. But there is no way. See, this is the problem. The interstate leaders have labelled Victoria. They can't tell the goddamn difference between Melbourne and Victoria, so they just label the state. So don't go interstate, Victoria. You're not going to be welcome. At the end of this, you won't be welcome. It doesn't matter if you come from freaking regional Victoria. Don't go to New South Wales. Don't go to Queensland. You won't be welcome. You'll be banned. Don't go to WA. Don't go to South Australia. Same difference. At the end of all this, every fucking Victorian will still have to go into 14 days quarantine, even if all restrictions are moved. Because the interstate leaders have labelled the whole state. I live in regional Victoria. We're 21 days fucking clear of it. There's been no active cases for 14 days. The last active case takes it up to 21 days of no cases in Geelong. There's no cases in freaking Bendigo. There's no cases in Ballarat. There's no cases in Mildura. Because the vast majority of Victorians have done what we were told to do. And yet we get no credit from the interstate leaders from that. We get a little bit of a mention from Dan Andrews about how well we've done, and yet you've got Metro Melbourne is in a second wave. It's not a case of, is this a second wave? It is. It's 50 fucking cases. with at least another 20 or 30 due out this morning. Need I say anything else? I tell you now, even if we do get a fucking vaccine at the end of this and all restrictions are moved, no Victorian will be welcome anywhere else in the fucking country. And I doubt anyone in the country will ever come to Victoria again. Because why would you come here when your state leaders have labelled the whole of Victoria as a disaster zone? Yeah? If that's your way, that's fine. Victorians can just go back overseas and holiday. There's no point holidaying in Australia. We're not welcome. I'll catch you tonight at Backyard Tech for the convo. See ya.